Ymedia Group, the fastest growing media group in North America.
Hello and welcome to Ymedia Newsroom. I'm Ramona Singh, and it's always so great to spend this time with you. There is a lot happening over the weekend and today, so lots to catch up on. The big question is Canada facing a growing threat from within Canada or from beyond its borders? There's a new investigation that's been released that's suggesting that some of the loudest voices when it comes to the separatist movement in Alberta is online and it's coming from outside of Canada. So not even Canadians are the loudest voices for when it comes to the separatist movement in Alberta. We're going to cover all the latest details on that. And when it comes to internationally, well, the tensions were really high in the Middle East. If you caught the headlines between Israel and Iran, we've seen exchanges and missiles. We're going to bring you the latest of what is happening. And this happened despite President Trump pushing for restraint for the ongoing negotiation. So you want to stay tuned for all those details. And we're going to tell you about a latest report by the Pentagon. Essentially, it's raised concerns about Israeli intelligence activities taking place in the United States. This is all information coming to, information for us to know at a time where we're seeing that there may be tensions between the two biggest allies, the United States and Israel, as we've heard so many different reports, but this is the latest one when it comes to Israeli intelligence activities increasing inside the United States. And if you saw the headlines or you saw the snapshots of the videos of President Trump walking out on an NBC interview, we have that today. You want to stay tuned for all of that for the newsroom. So let's start with this biggest conflict that's been taking place in the Middle East between Israel and Iran and the United States and including Lebanon. Well, it's been going on for about 100 days now, and we have the latest development as the escalations increased over the weekend. There were in a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, more specifically in the United States. It's been a ceasefire since April 7th. And even though there's been escalatory strikes going on between Israel and Lebanon with Hezbollah, well, this all happened over the weekend. Essentially, if you recall, we covered that there was supposed to be a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, to which Hezbollah said no, because they said that if there's a ceasefire, it means that the IDF, the Israeli soldiers, would still remain in southern Lebanon. And to that, they said they don't agree. They weren't at the table, and the strikes continued with Hezbollah and northern Israel. And to that, well, Iran stepped in and decided to strike Haifa, which is the third largest city in Israel. So this escalation happened yesterday over the weekend. And to this, you had President Trump essentially say that he wants restraint from Israel's side, saying that you both exchanged missiles and now let's go back to the ceasefire. And to this is developing story. Now it seems like everything has stopped right now between the two countries, that they're not actively in combat. But you have this escalation that began after Israel conducted strikes in southern Beirut. Right. And so this is not just southern Lebanon, but the capital city of Lebanon, Beirut, targeting Hezbollah linked infrastructure. Then Iran responded by launching ballistic missiles towards Israel. So there has been a ceasefire with missiles being launched into Israel from Iran for, the last 2 months since the first week of April, since the April 7th ceasefire. Now, Iran responded to this by launching the ballistic missiles towards Israel. And what that did was Israel retaliated with strikes on missile sites and military infrastructure in central and western Iran. Explosions were reported in several Iranian cities like Tehran, the capital city, Esfahan, and Kermanshah. President Trump, he said he urged that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to not retaliate, essentially saying that they're in the middle of a peace deal and that if there's going to be a retaliation by Israel, for the missiles strikes from Iran, that it could essentially start up the war again and torpedo the peace negotiations that the United States is in. It sounds like, week by week, they keep saying that the negotiations are almost done. It's just a few more items. So this is all happening all at the same time. So here's essentially what happened. The escalation point was because Iran launched missiles at Israel following Israeli strikes in Beirut, and Israel responded with airstrikes on Iranian military targets. The U.S. military said it was not involved in Israel's operation at all. The U.S. was not part of the exchanges that occurred over the weekend. President Trump publicly called on both sides to stop shooting immediately, and Iran later announced that it was suspending attacks, but warned that it would have a crushing retaliation if Israeli strikes continued again. Israel and Iran both indicated that future military actions would depend on whether the future attacks occur. So, whether further attacks occur. So, essentially, Iran has said that they want Lebanon as part of the peace deal. We know that when April 7th not peace deal, but when the ceasefire happened on April 7th, essentially Israel and Lebanon were still exchanging missiles with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and with Israel essentially occupying southern Lebanon is essentially what's been taking place. And to that, if you recall, there was the entire back and forth on Lebanon should be part of the ceasefire, and they continued their exchanges. Now, Lebanon and Israel prior to the weekend announced a ceasefire, but that means that the Israeli forces would have remained inside of Lebanon, not withdraw back into Israel. To that, you had Hezbollah increase its attacks, and then to that, you had Israel, target Beirut, capital of Lebanon, and then to that, you had Iran shoot missiles into Israel, and then you had Israel shoot missiles into Iran. So and now they've suspended it. So exactly, Iran reported firing 11 ballistic missiles towards Israel during the latest exchange. To that, essentially, as soon as that was seen, it made headlines. The market reacts immediately. Oil prices jumped briefly, approximately 5%, as traders feared that this entire war is going to escalate again and we're going to be in another situation. And of course, with the Strait of Hormuz, with what's happening there, you have the Iranians blocking the Strait of Hormuz, asking for a fee to bypass, and you have the US ships there who are, I guess you could say, double blocking or blocking Iranian ports. So there's a lot of things happening at the same time. Nearly 3,500 Israeli airstrikes have reportedly been carried out in Lebanon since April, and this is an ongoing conflict. So now the biggest concern here is, you had this immediate exchange of missiles. And then what could happen is the risk of miscalculation. Because the United States and Israel launched the initial strikes on Iran back in February 28th. Now we're looking at 100 days from now. Essentially, when the United States is trying to do a deal with Iran, and it seems like President Trump says he's got the final say, but it looks like President Trump cannot essentially influence how Israel is going to respond, whether it's in southern Lebanon. And so it's a situation of four countries involved. Meanwhile, two are at the table, which is the United States and Iran. They're at the table for a peace deal. Meanwhile, you have the entire dynamic of Israel and Iran, and you have the dynamic of Israel and Lebanon, and then the dynamic between Iran and Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the dynamic between the United States and Israel. So it's a very complicated situation. And when you see missiles, being shot in the neighboring countries, then it could risk miscalculation. The April ceasefires essentially helped stabilize the region, but only between Iran, US, and Israel. It did not stop between Israel and southern Lebanon. And this is a time where we're seeing this development take place, and yet we've heard after stalled negotiations between the two countries, not coming to the points on whether Iran is going to get rid of its enriched uranium. We know that Iran has now agreed to suspending any of its enrichment for about 15 years is the latest number. United States said it should be around 20 years. Iran's asked for reparations for the damages caused from the war. And so there's so many items. And then Iran has asked for a formalization to become the authority of the Strait of Hormuz, charging fees. And then later to that, maybe Oman also partakes in that. So there's so many things that are part of this peace deal. If you recall, there was the first negotiations took place way back in April when you had it spearheaded by Vice President JD Vance. After almost 20 hours of discussions, really nothing came of it. But we're hearing that there's developments. We had Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, saying that, the deal is imminent, it should happen. We've seen the stock market essentially, stabilize when it comes to oil prices. Crude oil fell below $100 per barrel, but now you had this escalation take place. It appears that Israel does not want there to be a peace deal, because Israel and with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who's been, who's given many interviews in American outlets, has said essentially, they believe that Iran should dismantle their nuclear facilities, to which Iran says no. And they say that the enriched uranium stockpiles that they have, it's enriched about 60%, should be removed, whether it's, boots on the ground. That is the contentious part that Iran has so far said no to. So it'll be very interesting to see where that ends up. But it appears that, Israel's not going to withdraw from southern Lebanon. They're saying that they're extending their borders and taking over southern Lebanon to the Litani River. And so you have all of these developments happening at the same time. And when it comes to the prime minister, Israeli prime minister, listen, he's got, a warrant out for him by the International Criminal Courts. We know that there's been, a lot of uprise and upset by the Israeli people because they're in constant wars. And and this is a time where we're seeing him in one, fight after another, whether what's happened with Gaza and that's ongoing, then you have the war with Iran, then you have the war in Lebanon and extending its borders. So this is a situation where it seems like President Trump cannot manage Israel or expectations, and so it'll be very interesting to see what comes out of this, because we know the red lines that have been pushed by the United States on Iran has so far been because of Israel, wanting Iran not to be a nuclear nation, not to have enriched uraniums, and for their safety and concerns. And Israel, has gone through the United States to have some of those red lines for this peace deal. But these current escalations that are taking place are all part of what we're seeing in terms of the stalemate on coming to an end of war. And this affects everyone. It's not just a regional situation. It affects obviously the GCC countries that share the Strait of Hormuz with Iran. It affects all the other countries like in Pacific Asia or Europe that rely heavily on energy, on oil exports from the Middle East, from the GCC countries. So when you take all that into consideration, this was not just a regional incident. This actually affects the global markets. And all eyes are on the situation as President Trump is trying to, it seems, calm the situation. And, he went out and he said, I have the final say. Israel does not have the final say, but Israel still has their own interests, and this is part of what we're seeing develop. And this is happening all at the same time where we're hearing news stories that the Pentagon, Defense Intelligence Agency, has essentially created a red flag saying that Israeli counterintelligence threat has escalated at a critical level in the United States. We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back and I'll tell you all about what's happening.